people living in the isolated north of Gaza have told the BBC that children are going without food for days, as aid convoys are increasingly denied permits to enter. Some residents have resorted to grinding animal feed into flour to survive, but even stocks of those grains are now dwindling, they say. People have also described digging down into the soil to access water pipes for drinking and washing. The UN has warned that acute malnutrition among young children in the north has risen sharply, and is now above the critical threshold of 15%. The UN's Humanitarian Coordination Agency, Ocha, says more than half the aid missions to the north of Gaza were denied access last month, and that there is increasing interference from Israeli forces in how and where aid is delivered. It says 300,000 people estimated to be living in northern areas are largely cut off from assistance, and face a growing risk of famine. A spokesman for the Israeli military agency tasked with coordinating aid access in Gaza said in a briefing last month that there was no starvation in Gaza. The agency, Kagat, has repeatedly said it does not limit the amount of humanitarian aid sent to Gaza. The BBC spoke to 3 people living in Gaza City and Beit Lahiya, and viewed footage and interviews filmed by local journalists in Jabalia. Mahmoud Shalabi, a local medical aid worker in Beit Lahiya, said people had been grinding grains used for animal feed into flour, but that even that was now running out. People are not finding it in the market, he said. It's unavailable nowadays in the north of Gaza and Gaza City. He also said stocks of tinned food were disappearing. What we had was actually from the 6 or 7 days of truce in November, and whatever aid was allowed into the north of Gaza has actually been consumed by now. What people are eating right now is basically rice, and only rice. The World Food Programme, WFP, told the BBC this week that 4 out of the last 5 aid convoys into the north had been stopped by Israeli forces, meaning a gap of 2 weeks between deliveries to Gaza City. New figures from the UN suggest that more than half the agricultural land in the central region of Deir al-Balah has been damaged. This includes an olive press and farmland belonging to Bassem Yunus Abu Zayed. It looks like the aftermath of an earthquake, he said. The destruction is vast, covering neighboring buildings and farm animals. Even if we manage to restore the mill, 80 to 90% of the olives have gone. It's not just a loss for this year, it's a loss for the next several years. Further south, in the border town of Rafah, more than 1 million people displaced by the fighting elsewhere now jostle for space with the town's 300,000 residents. Israel's army regularly publishes what it says is recent footage of busy markets and restaurants in Gaza's southern centers. A majority of the 114 aid missions to southern areas of Gaza managed to get through last month, but residents and aid agencies say many people are still going hungry, and a public health crisis is looming with a lack of shelter, sanitation and medical care. Aid can be blocked by fighting, bureaucracy or rubble. Earlier this week, a food convoy waiting to head north in Gaza was hit by naval gunfire. But deliveries are also complicated by the growing desperation of Gaza's people, says Matt Hollingworth. We need the law and order issue resolved, so that we're not having to negotiate our way through crowds of desperately hungry people, to get to other people that we've yet to reach, he said. It's probably the level of helplessness that worries me. People have lost hope. A deal between Israel and Hamas is seen by many as the only way to get more aid into Gaza, and get Israeli hostages out. As Israel bombs Rafah, ahead of a widely expected ground offensive there, leaders on both sides are under pressure to end the suffering of people trapped in Gaza, their enemies, and their own.